so welcome back. This is the second recording for Unit 4, focusing on personality. And so the last theory we covered was that by Sigmund Freud, the psychoanalytic theory that he proposed. And Freud had many critics. Some of the criticism was on his focus on sexuality as being the pervasive force behind personality. And so the critics who had some reservations about his psychoanalytic theory described that sexuality is not the pervasive force behind personality. And the first 5 years of life, as Sigmund Freud described, are not as powerful in shaping adult personality. Okay? And moreover, another criticism was that the ego and conscious thought processes play dominant roles in personality. And also another main criticism is that social cultural factors are more important than Freud believed. And so one theory by Carl Jung, who was working with Sigmund Freud but had a different approach, was that Carl Jung described his theory. He called this analytical psychology, and this theory describes that there is a personal unconscious, but there's also a collective unconscious. And again, the unconscious is that which lies below our level of awareness. So according to him, the collective unconscious describes the impersonal. So these are not things that are personal to individuals, but are shared collectively. Okay. And in this theory, impersonal means that it's the same across each person. It's not distinct to one individual. Rather, it's the same across each person. Okay. And he also talked about archetypes. So archetypes are these emotionally charged or emotionally laden ideas and images that have a very symbolic meaning for people, for all people. Okay. And two of the main archetypes are the anima, which is the woman, and the animus. And the animus is the man. And so according to Carl Jung, there's also the shadow. The shadow is also, that's the dark side of each human. And so these archetypes, the anima, which is the woman, the animus, which is the man, the shadow, these are shared. There are images that have a symbolic meaning for people, and each one of us experiences each of these archetypes. Okay. So now we're going to look at Adler's theory. So he focused on individual psychology, and he describes that individual psychology is when people are motivated by purposes and goals. So according to his theory, which is individual psychology, okay, people are driven by purposes and goals. And the main motivator in humans is not sexuality, as Sigmund Freud had described, but in fact it is perfection. We all seek perfection. And so he also believed that social factors were more important than sexual motivation in shaping personality. Again, this is in contrast to Sigmund Freud. So rather than sexual motivation being the main determinant of personality, it is social factors play an important role. Okay, so again, there's strivings for superiority, which is being driven by purposes and goals and aiming for perfection, and also compensation, that we feel a sense of inferiority. So we feel inadequate in some way, according to this theory, that each one of us feels we are flawed. We have certain flaws. We are inadequate. And then we attempt to overcome this real or imagined inferiority by developing our own abilities. So we strive to develop abilities to compensate for our sense of inferiority. Okay, and so this is what Adler describes as individual psychology, and these are the key elements. And if people, for some reason or another, cannot compensate for their normal feelings of inferiority, then they develop an inferiority complex. Okay, so his theory also examines pathology or psychological problems that can emerge just by using these foundational elements. Individual psychology, which is being motivated by purposes and goals and striving for perfection, for superiority in our competencies and our skills, striving for perfection. Okay. Also describe that we do have a feeling of inferiority. So we feel that we have some flaws, we are inferior, and we have a natural response to compensate for that real or imagined inferiority by developing one's own abilities. So each person has their own abilities that they can perfect, they can improve upon. And so according to Carl Jung, we strive for that perfection of one's own ability. So one person, John, may be good at problem solving. Another person may be good at planning how to problem solve. Okay, so each of these persons can develop their competence, their unique competencies. Okay, great. So now we're going to look at I talked about the inferiority complex. So this is when the person cannot compensate for normal feelings of inferiority. So again, these feelings of inferiority are normal, they are natural. Okay, and if we can't compensate for the feelings of inferiority, we develop an inferiority complex, and then we strive to overcompensate. Okay, so we strive to overcompensate in an effort to alleviate that inferiority complex. Okay, and so the overarching goal of Adlerian psychotherapy, so now we're starting to talk about psychotherapy. The overarching goal of Adlerian psychotherapy is to help the patient overcome their feelings of inferiority, not by ignoring them, but by finding ways to build on competencies, to build on the strengths that make each person unique. So here's an illustration of Jung's vision of the collective unconscious. Again, going back to Carl Jung's theory, which describes the collective unconscious. And so these are filled with archetypes. Again, these emotionally laden ideas and images that have a rich symbolic meaning for people. And he describes again that each person does have conscious and unconscious levels of awareness. Okay, so you see that here in this illustration. Each person does have a conscious and unconscious level of awareness, but what each person shares, both all A, B, and C individuals depicted here share a collective unconscious, and that collective unconscious is shared by the entire human race. Okay, it is shared by the entire human race. Okay, so this is the deepest layer of the unconscious mind. And within that unconscious mind, that collective unconscious, is a storehouse of hidden ancestral images that are called archetypes. Okay, and so Jung believed that the important cultural symbols that are unique to each culture emerge from universal archetypes that all humans, every human in the entire human race. So this is why he argued that there's a remarkable resemblance among symbols from disparate cultures, from different cultures. So for instance, the mandala. So you can see the mandala here from various cultures. And so the mandala is this geometric figure that represents the universe for each culture. Okay, so here the mandala for Russia, so it's an orthodox geometric figure. There's icons from churches. Then the Navajo Indians. So note the similarity in the geometric figures. and from Tibet. So this should be Buddhist mandala. Okay, great. Let's continue. So now we're going to look at behavioral perspectives. So we've covered the so now we've covered the psychodynamic perspective. We covered the theories of Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung, and Alfred Adler. We've covered those. Now we're going to look at the behavioral perspectives. Okay, so the behavioral perspective was initiated by B.F. Skinner, and you probably recall B.F. Skinner's work from Psych 1001, which you've taken previously. And B.F. Skinner was the first to describe that human behavior is shaped purely by the environment. Okay, so the environment is what the environmental contingencies. So the stimulus reward or stimulus punishment associations that the person experiences is going to determine their responses and also their personality. It's going to shape their personality. So according to B.F. Skinner, we have no predetermined genetic predisposition. We are all, it's based on John Watson's theory that predates B.F. Skinner's theory, but the idea that we come to this world as a blank slate, that's John Watson's idea, and it's one that B.F. Skinner subscribes to. And so he believes that behaviors are caused by a situation. So they're caused by a situation, and this situation is going to instate some form of conditioning for the individual. Okay, so it's going to be classical conditioning or operant conditioning, and the person will start to develop response tendencies. So a preparedness, a disposition to respond in certain ways based on the contingencies, the reinforcement or punishment contingencies, or both, that they've experienced. Okay, so the types of classical and operant conditioning situations that the person has been presented with in their life will shape their responses, and these responses will ultimately inform their personality. Okay, and so B.F. Skinner described environmental determinism. So we have to break this down a bit. So determinism is a philosophical idea that free will is an illusion. So B.F. Skinner was very adamant about this position that humans' free will is an illusion, that we have no free will, we have no agency over our behavior, but rather, he argued, the behavior is shaped by the environment. So whatever environmental situations are presented in the person's life, they're going to shape the person's behavior and eventually their personality. So again, environmental determinism describes two things. Humans have no free will. Free will is an illusion. And moreover, it is the environment, the environmental contingencies that will shape the person's responses and eventually their personality. Okay, so now we're going to look at Alfred Bandura's theory. So Alfred Bandura focused his theory on social learning. So he described a social cognitive theory. Okay, so whereas B.F. Skinner saw behavior as being caused by a situation, Albert Bandura saw the individual causing the situations. Okay, so he postulated that the definition of the situation itself depends on the individual's belief about it. So the individual has more agency around what is happening to them, and can operate on their environment to shape their experiences. Okay, so he talked about cognitive processes and reciprocal determinism. So again, cognitive processes describe the person's beliefs about their experiences. How are they interpreting their experiences? What do they believe their experiences mean? The meaning that they assign to their experiences. Okay, so that's the cognitive process, the cognitive process. And reciprocal determinism describes that the person's behavior, environment, and their personal or these cognitive factors, their beliefs, their expectations, all these are factors that have a reciprocal dynamic. So they're going to influence one another. Okay, so he argues that our internal mental events, external environmental contingencies, and our overt behavior all influence one another. Okay, and we'll see that on the next slide. But that's what cognitive processes and reciprocal determinism describes. So mental events, those are cognitive processes, overt behavior, and environmental contingencies have a dynamic interaction. So they all influence one another. Okay, we'll see that. We'll repeat that on the next slide. Okay, and then we have, so observational learning. Observational shows is that through observational learning, individuals come to form ideas about how others act, the behaviors of others, and then possibly adopt this behavior themselves. So they come to model the behavior of others, to emulate the behavior of others. So he described that others do become potential models because we emulate, we mirror their behaviors, they model they can become models of that behavior. And you probably remember the experiment that he conducted. We followed this in Psych 1001, where remember the experiment called the Bobo doll, where some children were shown videos of adults who were striking an inflatable doll. They were hitting it with a hammer and kicking it and being very violent towards that inflatable doll. And you saw that in that experiment, which is a famous experiment, you saw that children who saw videos of adults doing that repeated the same behaviors. Okay, so they ended up mimicking those adults who served as models in that experience. Okay, that's internal locus of control. So I have agency, I have free will, and I can behave in ways that are going to be congruent with my goals and my beliefs and my ambitions. Okay, so that's internal locus of control. Then we have a sense of behavioral control coming from outside of the person. That's external locus of control. So external locus of control is when the person says the things that they experience are caused or directed by external forces. Okay, so they have no personal agency. Rather, some external variables are causing them to have the experiences that they have. Okay, and then we have self-efficacy. So that self-efficacy describes the belief a person harbors about their ability to master a situation and produce positive outcomes. Okay, so think about your own self-efficacy. Do you believe that you can master a situation and produce positive outcomes? Okay, so this is how, based on self-efficacy, if we do harbor that belief, then we can start to develop healthy habits. So healthy habits about how much effort that we expend in the goals that we've set for ourselves. Do we focus on our goals? Do we devote our time exclusively to our goals at the exclusion of distractors, right? So we develop healthy habits. Or another healthy habit we could develop is how much effort we expend in coping with stress. So to cope with stress in healthy ways, how much effort do we expend in that? We put the cell phone away for 5 to 6 hours per day, just put it away so that the mind can have some rest. And also it shows how well we persist in the face of obstacles. So do we persist when we have obstacles? And finally, how much pain and stress we can experience. So if we have a healthy approach and we that aligns with our sense of self-efficacy, then we're going to take the necessary steps, apply the necessary practices in order to persist in the face of obstacles and diminish the pain and the stress that we experience. Okay, and then we have Michel's view. So Michel examined the research on trait prediction of behavior and found that something was missing. And what he found was that there's no evidence of cross-situational consistency in behavior. What that means is that if a person is described to be an introverted, for instance, that's a trait. So they score low on extroversion. So they're introverted. They score very low. But then what he noticed is that there was no cross-situational consistency. So individuals who were rated as being introverted in certain situations, when placed in another situation, all of a sudden they showed that they were extroverted. So there's something about the situation, okay? And this is what he described as a person-situation controversy, in that there are often, personality often changes according to a given situation. Okay, so that's a person-situation controversy. So personality changes according to a given situation. Okay, so what this means is that the personality and the behavior will often vary considerably from one context to another. So, okay, let's repeat that because it's worth repeating. So the person-situation controversy describes that the personality and the behavior of a person displays often vary considerably from one context to another. Let's give an example. So one person may be appearing very introverted when they're talking to their teacher or their professor or whatever, their instructor at the Polytechnic. But then someone may conclude, oh, this person may be introverted. But then when they're placed in a context with their familiar friends, then they're very expressive. They share information. They're very outgoing. Okay. So this is what Michel's view describes. So the question is not whether personality predicts behavior according to his view, but how and when it does so.